Hi, I'm Lawrence Jordan here with the AIography Podcast, and today we have the great pleasure to interview Robert Gaudette, who is the maker of the 2026 Runway AI Grand Prix Film Festival with his film, A Face Only a Mother Could Love. It's a real remarkable achievement because so many people don't believe that you could make a film that moves people with AI. And Robert has proven them wrong. He's made a beautiful story that has a tremendous amount of heart. And we're here today to talk to him about how he did it. Because the other part of the equation is Robert doesn't consider himself a professional filmmaker, although now he is, in spite of what he might think. Hello, Robert. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Lawrence. Really happy to be here. And you nailed it. I mean, I'm a guy who's been working in AI for 3.5 years full time, but mostly in pre-production. And I've always written, but I've never really attempted to put, a moving picture together. I was a photographer, so I understand the concept of, telling stories through images. But yeah, this was my first real go at it.
Cool. And quite successful at that. You're a 54-year-old nonprofit worker from Toronto, although you do have a, sort of an AI business on the side with, images and video. You never went to film school and you just won Runway's top prize. Just walk us through how that happened.
Yeah, so I spent about 8.5 years working in nonprofit, and I did pivot about 3.5 years ago. I had a side hustle of doing AI work, and fortunately, I was able to transition to doing that full time. And prior to that, I had a career, for about 10 years working as a photographer. I started the project as a marketing tool and more of an experiment. I've always written, I've always had ideas that I wanted to see realized my whole life. And so I took one of my ideas and began to experiment with it, using Seedance 2, which is kind of a benchmark tool in the development. When we look back, we'll probably be like pre-Seedance and post-Seedance in terms of what you can do. But I saw the potential in the tool to be able to try and do some human storytelling. And so I took an idea that I had, more fully flushed out the concept and created the characters and, locked everything down and then began generating in Seedance. And when I was done, I thought I had something pretty special. And I thought it was special enough to take a shot at entering it into the film festival world. And I did enter it into Runway. And when I was an official selection, my mind was blown because I really didn't have any outside feedback on it. You show your family and your friends and they're going to support you regardless. But, I had no objective point of view from anyone outside of my world. So that was a huge accomplishment for me just to get selected. And then to win was, it still doesn't feel real. The way people have responded still feels like I'm in a bit of a dreamland, but it's been a wonderful experience.
Creating a film with that kind of power, the grand prize couldn't have hurt.
Yeah, for sure.
So you had a bunch of scripts in drawers that nobody wanted, you thought. Why was Marcel, the character in the film, the one you finally chose?
Well, because it was a short concept and I knew I only wanted to create a short, again, because I was doing it as a personal project and a test. And I knew the type of story that I wanted to tell. So, I think there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet right now. Sci-fi and horror and fantasy are wonderful genres. I'm a huge fan of them all. But I think there's some pretty proven work out there that shows you can create spectacular, stunning VFX style images. So I wanted to try and head in a little bit of a different direction and see, could I tell a story that really focused on, the human experience? And it's quite a simple story. It's not a new story by any means. And so I wanted the simplicity of that to see, additionally, what could I do in terms of character development in 8 minutes and then show, can we connect with that character even though it's a synthetic character? Can we feel their emotions? Do we relate? Can we have empathy for them? And so that was the purpose of the experiment I was undertaking. And So when I was iterating characters, I'll say this probably many times through the interview, I feel like I was given a lot of gifts on this, but I was iterating. I knew I wanted an individual with a facial disfigurement because I wanted the audience to, immediately understand the type of life or life experience that this individual might have had. So in a short film, sometimes it's hard to find the time to do proper character development. And I knew an audience would get it. When they saw somebody who looked like Marcel, how the world might have treated him. And, while iterating a few different versions of that character, Marcel popped up. It's like he chose me. It was undeniably him. And that really locked down the rest of the details for the script. And I was really shocked at the ability of Seedance to understand not only the visual information I was giving it, but to also understand the subtext between characters and the nuanced emotional performance, which were things I prompted in. And
Right.
I was very surprised and very pleased, with the end result.
Yeah, Seedance 2.0 is an amazing tool, and there have been these rumors of Seedance 2.5 having all kinds of additional features. So it's like every day is just another breakthrough in this technology, and it's just a really exciting time to be part of it. So Seedance was your main tool. You used it a bunch of different ways. Take me from blank page to first shot. I mean, what did day one look like to you?
Yeah, so I kind of took my idea and charted it down into the story arc. I had a rough idea of characters and I had a rough idea of what the story was going to be. I had it shaped. So I went into Grok. I find Grok is really good at iterating. It's affordable. So I started in Grok and started iterating for characters. After maybe 20 minutes or so, I landed on Marcel. And then from Grok, I go into Nano Banana. I use Pro still. It's just a personal preference. Some people like 2, and then created a 4-panel turnaround character sheet. And then from there, in between those steps, I finished up my script. So once I saw Marcel, it really locked in the fact that he was a Frenchman and we were going for Paris and we were staying with narration. All of those things kind of came together. And from there, I went directly into Seedance and I generated not using image to video, which used to be my workflow, but now I was using Omni references. So you put the character in, you put any environmental references in, and Seedance brings that all together. I wasn't super concerned about composition on this. A lot of it centered like a Wes Anderson film. I thought it fit, I wasn't really hung up on, getting really strict director control over the composition of all of the frames as long as it served the story. And so I curated based on performance and based on, things like environmental consistency and dialogue consistency. And I gave it a lot of room to breathe around the composition. The more variables you're trying to land in the same generation, the more challenging it becomes. So in this case, again, without knowing what I was creating it for, I really just went for performance and like some emotional nuance in what I was curating from the generations. From there, I overlaid the narration, which I created in 11 Labs. I didn't have to do any vocal redubbing, which you might have to do for like dialogue consistency. There's very little dialogue. And so, Marcel's voice stayed close enough to the same that I didn't have to go back to 11 Labs and redub all of the dialogue.
Nice.
And then I did a little bit of sound design. I mean, the sound design natively coming out of Seedance 2 is pretty good in terms of like footsteps and ambient stuff. I had to pull in a little bit, and then manually edit them in. I would do that by generating additional clips in Seedance. So if I didn't have a nice like foot sound walking across the wood floor, I would go generate an additional clip just to use the audio if it worked better, and then do that in post, add that in. And then I cut the film, used Topaz video. Actually, I didn't use any of the new AI upresers. I find they're a little too sharp, and I like my stuff a little bit soft and grainy because I'm an old guy and that's what cinema looks like to me. Yeah, so I upscaled using Topaz video. I didn't have to do any color because I was, I had good style references all the way through my generations. I didn't have to tweak it much, and that was it. And then we had the final cut.
Far out. That's a great description of your workflow. For my own edification, you said you just, you didn't use image prompts, you used elements and obviously a text prompt. Did you have your background as a separate prompt and then your characters and whatever other elements? How does that come together when you're generating from different elements, particularly the backgrounds, because they are so beautiful in the project?
Yeah, I tackled this in a little bit of a different way. Again, because it was an experiment, and I generated the characters and uploaded the character sheets as the character reference. So that's one image that you supply with your text prompt. And then I described what the environment should look like and let Dance run it out. And then I found a generation that I really liked. And what I did was pull a still image from that generation, take it over into GPT-2 or Nano Banana, tell it to remove the character from that image if the character's in it. And then now you've created an environmental plate or an environmental image reference straight out of Dance. And I found it was a little nicer and matched the lighting of the character and the character than doing them individually. So if I had just created a background plate of like a Parisian apartment and put it in, the model would work to correlate, what the light should look like and what the character image and that image looks like. Instead, I just left it up to Dance, and I kind of reverse engineered it and pulled the environments out of the stills of the video.
Very interesting. That's really interesting. So you had a very clean, unique background plate that you could do anything with.
Yeah. And then I could just generate them from other clips as I went along too. Instead of being locked in, like I didn't have tight art direction on this. I was really flexible as I went through. I knew the style. So I didn't have these stills that were locked. It was, I would start with the character and then my description of what was happening, and then allow Dance to generate those environments and then pull them out of the videos for the ones that I liked. And I found it gave a little more depth. I think things matched a little better than they might, when you're doing strictly image reference for environment.
Right.
Or even objects is the same. The flowers, when Marcel is running back when he chickens out from going to the park and he's holding that bouquet of flowers, in shots that follow that, what I did was created a character or an object reference, again, by pulling that still image out of Dance and using it to create a new character sheet. So Dance also created that initial object, and then I carried it forward. I mean, I prompted it that he's holding this specific detailed type of bouquet. But in terms of using the actual image, again, I stayed with that workflow through the entirety of the film.
Most AI filmmakers cut fast to hide the scene. You went the other way, longer, sustained scenes that needed an astonishing number of generations. Did that make it harder on yourself?
Yes and no. One, I got a lot of gifts on this again, and I was very flexible in what I was looking for. I think when you're doing something that's really fast moving or visually spectacular, that's harder to hit in these generations because there's so much going on, so that you end up using 5 seconds out of a 15-second clip, and you do have to cut much faster. There's not a whole lot of action in this film other than like the dancing sequences. It really is focused on the characters' expressions, and very normal things happening in the environment. So I think I could generate longer without getting as many errors. If I was really swinging the camera around and, we were chasing objects, I think it becomes much more challenging. But again, like the cinematography in this is really just based on, let's really target and focus on what's happening with the characters. So that allowed me to get longer generations that were accurate. Now, I certainly generated a lot, but I think you have to on every project nowadays. It depends on how long it takes you to be satisfied, because ultimately it's always a compromise. So how many of these are we going to turn down before, it hits the requirements that we're looking for? Yeah, I would say it's the content of the film that allowed me to generate longer shots. Yeah, that work.
Yeah, that's always my problem. Whereas you have a vision in your head of what you want to generate, it never looks like that. And then you tweak to the point of, getting closer to the image you're imagining. And at a certain point, and this is when I've been on, full productions, you have to ship. Otherwise, as artists, we will stay in the sandbox forever until someone pulls the plug. And I imagine that was something, an experimental filmmaker, you had to deal with yourself. You had to say to yourself, well, I could keep going on this forever, but it's time to move on or I'm just going to, never finish.
Yeah, absolutely. And although I've never really, I took one film class in university, like a 101, but I've always loved film and I'm not a cinephile. Like I know what I know my narrow passage. But again, you could be Kubrick and you can just drill down and do 117 takes, but your AI character doesn't get tired in the same way Shelley Duvall did, and like where you're working towards to prod an actor towards a performance. So to me, again, it was about what's the purpose of this shot and really understanding what that was. And then what's the most important thing about that shot in order to serve the story. So like, was it Marcel's expression was just perfect, but other elements were imperfect, And so it was all about compromising all of those different things. But yeah, you're right. Ultimately, this is very much like real life filmmaking, as far as I understand it, in terms of there's an idea and then all of these different creative elements that all have free will or different limitations come together to execute it. And then, yeah, you just accept where you're at. When it's good enough.
Yeah. Very few of us have the flexibility or, a power of a Fincher or a Nolan who can shoot 100 takes. And as I understand it, a lot of the actors got very, very exhausted from that.
I'm sure. And part of the genius is that they factor that into what it does to their performance. Either that or that's an old wives' tale. I don't know, but I hear that sometimes and you think sometimes maybe that's the brilliance of these directors in terms of getting what it is that they're looking for.
Yeah, that's a question I've never been able to answer because, how much can you get from one human being, doing it 50, 60 times. It's just, and then sitting in the cutting room and trying to decide which one of those, are the best.
For sure.
So how do you direct a performance when there's no actor? When you needed Marcel to feel a specific way, what were you actually doing?
Nowadays, I think most of us prompt in blocks. So you have a block that's dedicated to light and cinematography and action and dialogue. And what I started to use was a block called subtext. And so I'm not entirely sure if AI understood what I was doing, but it helped me in understanding what I was trying to accomplish too. So whether AI understood the subtext in terms of really describing how a character felt about the other character or the situation, it really helped me in terms of curating. It was like a constant reminder that the purpose of this shot is to capture, this subtle, nuanced facial expression that Marcel has because he's disappointed he's late to return to the park. And so it's a little bit of both, I think. I think my methodology, and I've been fortunate enough to talk quite a bit since winning the festival to different groups in terms of, what it is that I accomplished. And to me, it's really about you as the artist really understanding what you're after and understanding how to curate to accomplish that more than it's about the technical aspects, what software you used, what LUT you used, how it was cut. All of those things are certainly important, but I think it's the story and then deeply understanding the characters and then really understanding what you're trying to accomplish from shot to shot to fully round out the story so that what you start with in the beginning with intention, you have something that resembles that at the end.
That's very interesting. The subtext block. I really don't think I've ever seen that in any prompt, and I could see it being a very effective way that AI might put that into the equation.
There are some AI agents now, so I'm not sure if this is accurate anymore. But when you're generating, typically the engine has no idea what came before it. So it doesn't know the relationship between Marcel and his new love interest. So when I prompt that Marcel looks forward into the camera and feels sad, it has no idea to understand the context of which this is happening. So I just use the subtext to explain it. And again, test it for yourself. It worked for me. I'm not convinced it's entirely because of the text, but I do think it's like setting your intention and fully understanding what you're trying to create and curate. So again, who knows? Give it a shot.
Couldn't help. Couldn't hurt, might help. You never know. That's great. You taught yourself editing and sound. How did you cut it so it feels like a film and not a reel of clips? And how much of the emotion is living in the audio?
Yeah. So I taught myself audio recording and editing over decades and decades. It's always been something that I've had an interest in. So it's not like I just learned these skills in the last couple of years. Something that I've always done back into the 90s is play with this technology. I just love it. I love playing with music as well. So editing, I had a frame of reference for. I still wouldn't call myself an editor in terms of the art form of editing. I can perform the mechanics of editing, and I think I got a little lucky on this one. But for me, I think if I'm honest, narration is a big crutch. I think the narrator explains things that if this was a dialogue-driven film wouldn't be as obvious. So I think the narrator gives the context and says things that the characters don't necessarily have to emote. So it's a bit of a cheat for me through this film. But when you combine that with some nuanced performance, even though the characters aren't talking, I found their expressions were very good in terms of matching the narration. And I think the combination of those things plus the score and the visual impact of Marcel's appearance, again, you could argue that was a crutch. I tried an interesting experiment in this film where the female character is actually the same character as Marcel. They're on parallel journeys. One is disfigured and one is not. And so I wanted to see, could I accomplish those things, even though she has a lot less screen time? I think it comes across that she's lonely, has self-esteem issues, is withdrawn. And then this fortunate opportunity, presents itself and she makes a connection with Marcel. So yeah, I think I had put a lot of thought into how to cover a lot of ground in a short. I certainly used some cheat codes in terms of crutches, probably everyone I used on this one. But ultimately, I think it all panned out.
I was incredibly impressed with your use of cutaways and how so many people are excited about how a model can generate a clip. And, you put in a prompt and you get this clip and hallelujah. But the craft, and as you demonstrated, is assembling all of the different clips together to tell your story and not putting in too many clips that will take away from the flow of the story. But things like the way you intercut the boys chasing Marcel and the father looking at Marcel and the father leaving. And I was particularly impressed with the close-ups of the feet dancing. It demonstrates a real fundamental knowledge of filmmaking, whether, you want to believe it or not. Was that part of the plan? Did that sort of happen organically as you were assembling the film? Did you think it would be great to have a cutaway of this here? How did that work for you? How did that construction kind of come about?
I think it's a combination of things. One, I'm a 54-year-old lover of film. So I have a frame of reference over my lifetime of films I love. And, I was lucky when I was young to get some good introductions, to certain filmmakers, by other people. And I've just continued to follow that. So I don't necessarily sit there and do scene deconstructions and things like that, but you absorb this over time and it lets you understand pacing and things like that. When you need to put a little air in between shots. And so maybe you do that with a cutaway. Maybe you need, like in the park, I did that for sure when I have the kind of 3 sequential shots of the children in their Halloween outfits. And like the whole purpose of that sequence was just to give some air to the story instead of it just being like all the time.
Right.
The other thing is, in the past 3.5 years doing primarily pre-production, I've worked for some amazing directors. So I get to see them take a creative brief, flesh it out, turn it into beats, turn it into a storyboard, make a sizzle reel. A lot of it's been commercially, but some of it has been for feature film development. So I've had a working education in terms of, what these men and women are doing in their work, and being able to sit through that process and the production meetings on it has been really invaluable. The other piece, I think, again, it is just there's a natural feeling when I'm putting it together. I generate and create my rough assembly at the same time. I don't generate all the clips. I'll generate clip 1, dump it into my timeline. Then I'll create clip 2, dump it into my timeline. And as everybody that edits knows, you've watched it 10,000 times before you've even, finished it. And so I could get a really good feel for where it was. The scene with young Marcel and the X-ray glasses was like a spur of the moment addition to the script. I could feel that we needed some levity just organically by just experiencing the film myself as I went through. And so that was like a late addition to it. So it's just kind of all of those things. And who really knows like where that instinct comes from at the end of the day, but you just feel it. Sometimes you need to improvise a little bit and try it out. And it doesn't always work out and you dump it back out. But that's the beauty of AI is you can iterate. You don't have to go out and shoot something, especially if you're going to go out and shoot something additional and have to absorb those costs. Well, it better work, right? You're not just going to have that be a write-off after you bring everybody back together. AI helps you be able to play more. And whether you're doing this as like pre-visualization for a live action film that you might shoot, which I think is a great way to use AI, or if you're doing final production, I think take advantage of, what the tools allow you to do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And when I, started working on a project that I'm doing right now, I was amazed at just the thought process of, you just said, you can come up with an idea that you might never have thought of, might not have been in the script, and try it in the timeline. And it's really incredibly liberating as a filmmaker because of thinking of how it would be done the other way, which is a huge undertaking, getting a crew back together and trying to come up with a list of all the pickup shots that you need. You would never have that kind of flexibility that you have with AI. And it really makes the process a lot more fun. I mean, you still have to go and iterate and see if you can get the shots right and so on and so forth. But it really allows you to experiment and turn the film into something that you might never have thought it was when you started, right?
Yeah, and sometimes give the model a little bit of room to breathe too, instead of trying to over direct it all the time. And much like any collaborator, it can show you some stuff that you weren't expecting. When I was a photographer, I used to always say it was my job to just set up an environment for something to happen. Now, it wasn't my job to take a beautiful photograph of you. It was my job to set up this environment where like something great was going to happen or not, and then it was my job to try and, direct things or get the individual to react in a certain way. And I didn't have control over what those reactions would be. I was just providing stimulus in order to get a variety of things to happen. And so sometimes I take that approach when I'm using AI and see what the model gives me. I mean, the boot shot that you love, I should take credit for it. But I mean, I started with a close-up on the boots for the dancing scene. But the cut that comes after, which is that perfectly synced cut on action to his upper body turning, is the model's decision. I said, give me a multi-shot sequence starting with this, and then left it loose. And not every generation was great, but it would give me a variety of takes, just like a human actor might give you a variety of different takes. It gave me a variety of different scene coverage. And sometimes a little bit of magic showed up and I took advantage of it.
Cool. So you used multi-shot as well as generating individual clips.
Yeah. I mean, there were some shots where I would especially I generate everything at 15 seconds in C-Dance, whether I'm after a 3-second clip or not, because I just find I get good lead in time and then there's room for something else to happen that I might not have expected. I know it's more costly, but it's just how I prefer to work. So I'll either state, give me one continuous long take of something, or I'll say multi-shot sequence. And then most of the time I'll direct it. I'll say, give me a 2-shot of the people talking, close up then on character 1, cut to reaction. I'll typically try and get 3 shots in the sequence, but sometimes I'll leave it loose and just see what occurs. Again, because I think my style is very loose. It has always been, whether that's photography or in AI. And so I'm really open to getting, those gifts, or I'm very, very flexible. It's different when I'm working on client work or if I'm working with a director who has storyboard images. I mean, that's a different scenario and it's a different bar that I have to reach. But on my own stuff, yeah, I'm definitely more open to experimenting.
Your line that no one was going to fund a short film made by me, but AI, I guess they don't have to. What did this unlock that was kind of closed to you before?
So I think the way that reads in text sounds a lot more arrogant and cocky than the words actually were in person. What I meant by that is there was no reason for anyone to actually want to work with me. There was no special incentive. Nobody knew who I was. All of my previous work is basically under NDA, so I don't show any of it. The only thing the world has ever seen are my experiments. To get a short film funded to begin with is incredibly challenging because there's not a lot of return on investment on a short period. I didn't say that from an angry or frustrated point of view. I have submitted scripts and, gotten reviews back, but nothing has ever taken. Is that because of lack of access? Is that because of the quality of my scripts? I mean, who knows? It's probably a combination of everything, right? But with AI, I think you have now the ability to create these proof of concepts that maybe I'm not a wonderful writer, but if I can visualize it and allow you to see what I'm trying to say, maybe it's a better product than what I've been pitching. And that's really where I'm coming from with this is I think not all of us are wonderful writers or filmmakers, but we have these stories and this technology's come along to allow us, you don't have to be a one-person film studio, but pick up a role on somebody else's project and learn and work together and be part of the community. I guess we don't need, studio funding to create films. I think literally we've been seeing that. I think you've always seen that for some time. In indie filmmaking, although, 54 years old with a mortgage, I don't know that I was going to do the Rodriguez thing and max out all my credit cards to make my own breakthrough film. So yeah, I mean, different options for everyone. I mean, it's easy to place judgment and say you don't want it enough, when you're in a position of already being in Hollywood and saying you need to make these sacrifices to have your films made. Well, do you really? Or is that just a bit of gatekeeping and a little bit of, keeping yourself insulated against other stories and other competitors?
Sure. So for the filmmakers out there with sample scripts in the drawer, no money, no permission, what do you tell them?
Finish your stories. I've heard enough people say it back to me since the Runway competition, and I've always believed that story is king. Any course or any film school you ever went to prior to AI told you the same thing. It's all about story. Everything else is add-on. It's style. It's really interesting to me that only with AI has the narrative changed to, it's about the tools and it's about how you make it now. It's unethical to make it this way. It's no longer just about the story. It's like the game has changed. That's not true. Write your story, find something you feel really passionate with, and then make sure you really understand your story and your characters and what you're trying to say. Because what's going to differentiate you from other films that are out there, and we're going to be inundated by a sea of new content because of the democratization of the ability to tell stories. But I think if you want to stand out, you have to be saying something and have a point of view, just like in any other art form. That will connect with an audience. That will help you be able to engage with people beyond eye candy and spectacle and wonderful looking. That's what I was after. That's what I was trying to pursue. And it seems like I've been rewarded for that. So I guess that there's nothing wrong with Michael Bay movies either. They're fun. So I'm not saying you have to make Tarkovsky films only moving forward, but just have a point of view, understand what you're trying to say. And if you're just trying to entertain and that's your goal, then let your personality come through so it's unique.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there's room for everyone in the art form. What's the thing you wish someone had told you before you started? And where do people find you? And what's going to be the next one?
Imposter syndrome is real, Even when you're doing it and you're succeeding, imposter syndrome is just this thing that you feel and you really have to give very little credit to it. I still feel it, obviously. I felt it as a photographer, even when I was doing good work. You just have to brush that aside and not worry and just do the work that you want to do. And then hope that's enough. What the world does in response to it is what they're going to do. And I wish I need to tell myself that still. The pressure on creating a follow-up piece right now is enormous on me because I know that's the difference. between, being somebody who can consistently produce good work and somebody who got a gift. So, I mean,
Got a one-off.
I
Sure.
feel that heavily right now, but I do have some good stuff. And I have 4 more shorts that I think are about the human experience. They push the boundaries of what AI can do currently in terms of performance. One of those is going to become the front runner for what my next personal project will be. And alongside my commercial work, you got to pay your bills too, right?
Right.
You got to afford all this compute. So do both.
So my last question for you, have you transitioned to full-time AI creative, let's say, doing previs, doing sizzle reels, trailers, boards, decks? Is that the kind of business you run now?
Yeah. And I did that about 3.5 years ago. Made the transition to full-time. I make enough money to make a living doing it. I mean, it's a hard go just doing previs because you only get work when people are pitching. Almost all the pitching happens on weekends. So if you want to get in this game, you're going to be working every weekend because that's when directors are working on pitches. But I love it and I love the diversity of it. And I've considered it school in a way. But the next step for me after that is I'm in the middle of starting a studio venture with a partner. We have some of our own IP that we want to develop out. We're also getting, quite a bit of interest from other people in terms of, how can we help them develop their IP, whether it's an animated feature film, or a live action hybrid using AI for VFX. I mean, I've been really fortunate to get this breakthrough in terms of, winning a couple of festivals. And so I'm really optimistic about what comes next.
That's great. Yeah, I got to imagine that, getting this kind of recognition has opened up some real opportunities and the possibilities become endless, especially as we, are really still just on the runway of what, pardon the pun, of what this technology might ultimately be able to do. So, I wish you the best of luck with that. I want to say thank you for spending the time with us. I know that the people in our community are going to be thrilled learning the process because that's what so many people are just stuck on. It's like, where do I begin? How do I start to make my film? And I thought you explained it in a very clear and familiar way. Really, thank you. You've explained your process beautifully. The film is outstanding, well-deserved in terms of all the recognition and awards you've seen. And we wish you the best of luck and hopefully can have you back in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lawrence. And again, I just want to reiterate how thankful I am to even be in the conversation. It's just been a wonderful experience for me and my family. And so, we want to thank everyone for even being interested in listening to me.
Very cool. Very cool. All righty, Robert. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks again.
Bye now.